Once again, Sam Donaldson and the New Mexico PBS team produced a lively debate. If you missed it, watch online at New Mexico in Focus on our YouTube page. Now, both candidates arguably represented themselves well, and the one-on-one interviews were both candid and in-depth. Now, Sophie, Alan Way seems to have picked up some traction in the polls. Do you think he won some votes? Very simple question in that debate.
I'm gonna say truly, I don't think that he did.
Okay.
My sense of him, especially in the beginning of the debate, and I don't know how long people will have continued, was that he seemed a little unfocused and not really on point with his answers. And I sort of hate to say this, but I'm going to. He seemed old. And I really felt some concern in that, watching that. There felt like a real imbalance in vigor there.
Yeah. Between the two of them.
And this is the first time I really felt that he just seemed a little unfocused, and that it just was a strange message in the debate.
Yeah.
And in the interview as well.
Yeah, interestingly, Senator Feldman, I sense both these gentlemen came in with a game plan of some sort. And I'll use an example with Mr. Udall constantly referring to the Tea Party.
Right.
And it was just a pre-planned dig. What did you make of that? And was it effective? Was probably the better question as well.
Well, I thought that both candidates came in and were advised to press the hot buttons.
Gotcha.
And Udall obviously was advised to press the Tea Party button, and Way was advised to press the Obama button. And the debate was best, and it came off false, I think, on both sides. And the debate was best, though, when they kind of addressed one another and when they talked about New Mexico issues. And I actually came out of the debate feeling better about both of them for that reason, and kind of felt like, they could actually still talk to one another. How about that? Right. And it was maybe some of these other outside forces that were, including the moderator, that were kind of getting in the way of that.
Yeah, that could happen. Representative, as I said up top, the gap has closed. It had been sitting there with a big wide gap for the longest time. What do you personally attribute the closing of the gap to? What's going on?
Well, I think that Alan Way has gotten out on the ground, and when you engage him one-to-one, if you ask him a question, he's going to give you a direct answer, and people really like that. Now, when he has run before, he wasn't always out talking to people, but he has worked very hard to move the needle. Now, there's no doubt that the commercials that he has run, I think, have been effective, and it keeps moving it closer, and I'm not sure that the commercials that Senator Udall has run has been as effective.
Gotcha. Interesting. Your thought on that, what's closed the gap in your mind? What's happened here?
I think it's the fact that I was surprised that Alan Way went after Senator Udall so quickly, and Senator Udall waited so long to respond. I mean, there seemed to be this vacuum of Alan saying, he's the most liberal, he's with President Obama, running the ad saying his own wife wouldn't vote for him, and there was this, it seemed like a long time for a guy with a lot of money to kind of let this stuff resonate amongst the people.
Yeah. And bringing it forward to the debate itself, was that vibe there for you at the debate itself? Did he close something for you during that debate?
No, he didn't. I think, but to the points that have been made, I think that there's just I think people walked away just kind of looking at the debate and looking at both of those guys and going, okay.
Well,
I think both of them. I think that Alan Way comes off like a pretty stern military man. I think he's the kind of guy that, when rounds come down range, you want in your foxhole with you.
Sure.
But I think, in the debate, I think Udall kind of came off like a senator. He kind of came off like this statesman kind of guy. And so I think the one thing that I think worked in Alan Way's favor is I do believe that kind of what we talked about earlier, I think the tying folks to President Obama right now is resonating. I think the Tea Party story is getting old. I think people are like, you guys ran on that a few years ago.
And Mr. Way tried to beat that back with that same, it was a while ago, it's reframed now, the whole thing.
I think people are less afraid. I think right now, just today, with the national scene the way it is, my opinion, I think the average voter is less afraid of the Tea Party right now than they are of what they think is happening in Washington, D.C.
We'll go back to Senator Udall, Senator Feldman, about jobs. And is it my sense correct here that he is now the de facto protector of the labs, know everything about the labs, Mr. Udall. I almost heard echoes of Mr. Domenici in
Yes.
his language.
Yes,
But,
most definitely.
Yeah, because he really didn't talk about private sector jobs, because that was the question. He really devolved back into the labs and such.
Right, and he is an effective protector, and I think his argument that he saved Cannon Air Force Base was good.
Okay.
And the fact that Alan Way said he would be better on these issues just because he was in the military rang very hollow. I think that Alan Way kind of was his own worst enemy in the debate, in that he did seem like he was flip-flopping on Obamacare. He did seem like he was flip-flopping on whether the U.S. should invade Iraq again. He wasn't clear on that, and Udall was very clear. He had the experience. And
Whether you agreed with him or not, he was very clear.
But there were, so with regard to the labs, I do agree that Udall has been effective, except that the funding has been flat since 2011. It's flat. And I'm glad that it's flat. I don't want it to go down. But his claiming that he was responsible for increasing 6,400 jobs in New Mexico, when Alan Way talked about creating 30 jobs on the ground that he paid for, he wrote the checks for, seemed more credible. But I do want to slip around one thing. It is always, when you're debating in this situation, I have to hand it to Alan Way. He attempted a little bit of humor. It caught the moderator off guard. And it was a very uncomfortable moment.
Sure.
And one, to Senator Udall's credit, he didn't make a big deal out of it. I thought Alan Way recovered very nicely.
gentleman about it,
And
yeah.
at that point, then the discussion between the candidates started happening.
Warmed up.
I liked that.
What I did like out of the debate was I've been reading and watching and seeing a lot of these happening. They're happening all over the country with people not showing up. They had the PBS one where the guy wouldn't come out because of the fan in Florida. You had all this stuff. I do think to the sentiment around the deal, both of them did a good job, in my opinion, of bringing back the old school.
Yes.
We're gentlemen, we're statesmen,
Yes.
Yes.
we're going to talk about our differences, we're going to let people make decisions. It wasn't about, you got arrested for this, you said this, you had this.
right.
It was very to the point, and I think kudos to both of them, because I think that's
right.
an art that's been lost.
There's a way to be aggressive, but not ridiculous.
That's
Exactly
right.
right. Sophie, in both the one-on-one with Gwyneth Dolan
Yes.
and the debate, the subject of how Mr. Way makes his money with his company came up.
Well, and he brought it up quite a bit.
That's
I mean,
right.
and not necessarily saying, here's how big my paycheck is, not that, but it was a huge part of the conversation, and in part because Mr. Way has positioned himself as a businessman and the kind of businessman who can lead in D.C., and that really opens that up. In some ways, it's funny. At one point, I made a note. It was like he was saying, you should send your boss to Washington. That's what it felt like. And I don't know how well that resonates with most voters. But that discussion of his business, he has made it the center of his campaign.
Yeah.
Well.
Does that mean something to you? Do voters give something about that? You know what I mean?
Well,
How he
I
makes
wouldn't
his money?
send my boss to Washington if he was just wanted me to make $4 an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Way played right into that, and it was really unfortunate. But I mean, each candidate was playing to their base,
Yes.
obviously playing to their base, and Udall was playing to his base, and I think very successfully. This rise in Alan Way's polling numbers is not amongst women. There's still a big gender gap in that race, and so that came right into it at the end of the debate, where it was a right to choose
but I think Alan's
versus
done
right
a
to
really
life.
good job on the job side, talking about, if you're going to send someone to D.C. to create jobs, send someone that signed just the front of a paycheck,
you
not
go.
just the back of a
There you go.
paycheck.
Right.
And I think he drew
Gotta
that
stop you there,
distinction well.
unfortunately.
Okay.
Like so much to talk about. Anyway, head to our website at NewMexicoInFocus.org to watch as these guys go on the clock. For more news of the week, head to our website at NewMexicoInFocus.org and catch the line panelists as they go on the clock. If you missed last night's season premiere of Public Square, Child Wellbeing in New Mexico, catch it on the New Mexico PBS site as well. And as always, all of us here at New Mexico in Focus appreciate your time and your effort to stay informed and engaged. Catch up with us anytime on Facebook and Twitter by searching New Mexico in Focus. You can find archived interviews and often bonus material from our shows, including those on the clocks, on our YouTube channel and again at NewMexicoInFocus.org. I'm Gene Grant. We'll see you next week in Focus.